Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another one of my series of interviews with subject matter experts from throughout the country talking about the college admissions. And today I have with me a very special guest, Greg Smith, who has quite an extensive background. He is also a consultant working with international students. Welcome, Greg. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My pleasure.
So, can you please introduce yourself? Give us a little bit of information about your background and what you're doing now.
Absolutely. And I think, like a lot of people, I didn't set out to be an admissions counselor. It just kind of happened. I consider myself to be an academic. I have a PhD in history and political science. And I earned my PhD at Stanford. And while I was there, I did a lot of teaching, but I also had the opportunity to serve on various admissions committees. And that led me to apply for a job in the undergraduate admissions office there. And luckily, I got that job. And so I was there for 4 years, and that was great. And, I love Stanford. I have a lot of loyalty to it. But as we all know, Stanford's, it basically admits no students. So I really wanted, while it was rewarding to be there, I really wanted broader experience, dealing with schools that maybe admitted a wider variety of students, places that would offer opportunities for kids who maybe hadn't had everything come together just perfectly for them the way it takes for someone to be admitted to, a school like a Stanford or, any other of that caliber, that type. So anyway, I went to work at two small colleges. First, Notre Dame de Namur University, which was then College of Notre Dame, and then Menlo College. And I was director of admissions at Notre Dame, and then eventually VP for enrollment at Menlo. And while I was at both schools, I loved them. They were very different and from Stanford and different from each other. And I learned a lot about enrollment management and counseling, I think, between all of those jobs. And that was great. And then at that point, I sort of decided, well, I've worked for private schools my whole professional life. I really should see what the public sector is like. And an opportunity came up at Cal State East Bay to be the associate VP for enrollment, which is basically, that's kind of in the CSU system, that's kind of the dean of admissions kind of job, basically, dean of admissions and financial aid. So I took that job, and that was great. And I was there for 7 years, overseeing enrollment, development, outreach, recruitment, financial aid. And there I really had a chance to also have an impact on state policy in education, which was great. So that was a wonderful experience too. But over the course of all of this, as I sort of had more responsibility, I had less direct interaction with students, and that's what I really missed. So about 2.5 years ago, I made the decision to leave that side of the desk and become an independent counselor. I started working with Judith Winters, who's now my partner and has been doing this for many, many years, and I love it. And so that's who I am. And I work with a lot of international students now, especially in Hong Kong and China, but I also work with students, domestic students in the U.S. as well. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
So and that's exciting because you've had both the public and the private, the college side of the desk, and now you're on the high school counseling side of the desk. And,
right.
And so that gives you a perspective that really helps students and parents. And as you work with international students, how do they see that? They're coming in, you're a Stanford grad, you've had this experience. How do they receive that?
Well, so many international students, they love the Stanford thing, because Stanford's so hot in around the world, but especially in China and Hong Kong. And they love that. But what I do is then I say, yes, and that was great. And I love, just what I said basically now. I love Stanford. It was wonderful. For some students, that's the right choice. But you can get the same experience, or maybe depending on who you are, a better experience at a lot of other schools. And that's why I've worked at this wider variety. And I think people respond to that really well. And, I like to think it gives me some credibility because I have worked in other types of institutions. So I can say, I know what, a fairly large public university is like and for whom that's a good match. I know what small liberal arts colleges are like and for whom that's a good match. So I think it mostly gives me credibility.
Mm-hmm.
I hope.
That makes sense. I know in my conversations with counselors who work with a lot of international students, in my practice, mine is much more domestic and very much,
Hmm.
local oriented. But there is a conception among international schools, and in our class, we have a lot of people who are working at international schools and dealing with this with their parents, that they have this perception that, oh, the U.S. News and World Report ranking, one comes from the government, so therefore it must be
Right.
right, and
Right.
therefore I must take people, my student must
Right.
get these schools on this list. So how do you help
Right.
debunk that? I mean, you've
Right.
alluded to that a little bit. What else do you do to help them see that there are many other schools to look at?
Absolutely, and it's a continual battle. I mean, it definitely is. But some of what you just said is what I say too. Look, there's no official ranking. I explain how U.S. News and World Report puts them together. I mean, I used to be one of the people surveyed for those U.S. News and World Report rankings because I was the chief admissions officer at different schools. So and I don't tell them this, but I mean, I would fill out those ranking sheets, and I'd have to rank schools I'd never even heard of.
Mhm.
Again, I don't tell them that, but I do say it's opinion, it's fluid, it really means nothing in terms of anything official, and point out that there are lots of different rankings too. That if they're going to look at rankings, look at Forbes, look at Bloomberg, look at ranking by program, look at regional rankings, look at liberal arts colleges, and that usually helps when you get students off of the just the top national universities list and they start to see there are all these other ways of kind of slicing it. That
Mhm.
usually helps. It really does. Now I will say, not in every case. In many cases, I'm not able to successfully get families and students to totally stop looking at ranking, but at least I get them to be more open to different schools that might not have the ranking that would have first caught their attention. So
Mhm.
it usually works to some degree. you
Mhm.
know.
Well, and I think, even just getting them to add a few more is
Exactly.
definitely a step in the right direction for
Exactly. And
them.
getting them, yeah, oh, exactly. And getting them to look at different kinds of schools that they might not have considered and
Mhm.
find that they love it, that they really,
Mhm.
oh, wow, this school has a lot to offer me. Or pointing out, I just did this today with a student who wants computer science. And I pointed out to him how difficult it's going to be to be admitted in computer science at some of the top ranking according to U.S. News schools, but pointed out some other schools that are still, they're great schools, great universities, have great computer science programs, and he's actually much more likely to be admitted in computer science, which is what he wants, more likely to be able to do research, work with professors, all those things. And, I sort of saw a light bulb going on about that, and I thought, great, we're making progress here. So that kind
Mhm.
of thing, you just will keep working on, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of it
we all do.
is, they only hear about these certain small, narrow group of colleges and don't realize
Right,
all those other programs. So I think that's
right,
one of our role as counselors is to, you know, become informed. So what have you done
right.
to build that awareness and um, build that knowledge about these different computer science programs or different programs that students are looking at?
I read as much as I can and I ask as many questions as I can of everybody, and I really think that's one of the best ways to do it. I mean, reading, getting background in what the schools offer, what the programs entail,
Mhm.
but asking questions of my colleagues, I think that's why professional contacts are so important. I learned so much. I mean, I know now, I mean, you're a person I would go to with all kinds of questions because you have so much expertise. My partner Judy, so many people, and I'll know if I have a question about a particular major. I have friends who are counselors who are very well versed in those majors. For instance, a friend of mine who's a counselor in the Midwest really knows everything there is to know about music programs because he has a music degree himself. He's taught music and he's just worked with a lot of specialized students over the years. I call him with those kinds of questions. And another friend of mine did engineering admissions for years at a lot of schools, including Rice and Michigan, and schools with some great engineering programs. And he's very involved with faculty, engineering faculty around the country.
Mm-hmm.
He helps me. So, I think it's just constantly asking questions and, relying on the expert, not relying on, but sharing information with others and seeking that information back from them when it's going to be helpful for you. I think that's really what it's all about. And I think also my student feedback,
Mm-hmm.
talking to my students after they go to these universities, what's their experience like? When I visit the campuses myself, asking as many questions as possible. What's the classroom experience like? How is it working with professors? So on. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's just constantly asking questions, really.
Yeah, and it
You
goes
know?
to show that in this profession, you're never done. That because
No,
the questions you
no,
ask this year, they're going to change in a
yep,
year or two, and so
absolutely,
and
absolutely, and dramatically maybe. You
hmm
know?
hmm
Yeah, I totally agree. So it's sort of and I think the same thing with admission standards, right? I mean,
hmm
those change all the time, year to year, program to program, school to school. So yeah, absolutely agree. It's always changing, which makes it exciting and fun. Makes it a
hmm
little exhausting too, but it's fun for the most part.
It does.
Keeps you on your toes.
Exactly. And I think that's what's
Yeah,
appealing about it is that it is, you never get stagnant. Things are
yeah,
always
exactly. It's
changing.
always fresh. Agree.
So now, as you're working with families, in their senior year, we as counselors, students and parents are often faced with very tough decisions, and they've got
hmm
this array of college acceptances. What have you observed that helps students through this process? What do you have them evaluate and weigh to make those decisions?
I mean, first of all, I try to reassure students that it's going to be okay, that maybe they're not going to get into their first choice.
Mhm.
They're definitely going to be rejected by some schools. I don't think I've ever seen any student not rejected somewhere, even kids who eventually ended up going to Princeton, along the way, maybe they had some rejections, and that's okay, and try not to take it personally and take a deep breath and realize that again they'll have choices, and even if they don't get into their first pick of a major, they'll be able to transfer, they'll be able to change, they'll be able to double major. So I think that's part of it, and trying to keep them excited about their options and the schools they're looking at too, including excited about some of their safer choices. I think that
Mhm.
makes a real difference when students can say, okay, I'm really likely to be okay here, and I still maybe have this dream that's going to be a little bit tough to get to, but um, even if I don't quite make it to that one dream school I had, I think I'll have other good choices. And maybe I go to that dream school for graduate school, which I tell
Right,
them that too. It's
right,
not the end of the world. Yeah.
right, right.
So I think that's a big part of it.
It's interesting because, there are a lot of studies about students and grit and resilience. And so
hmm
often with Gen X, with this generation, college admissions is really the first time they've ever been told no. They
Yes.
have
Yes.
this experience of I've been able to do whatever I wanted all my life. And if I haven't been
hmm
able to, my parents have made it happen for me. And this is
hmm
one situation where it doesn't matter what parents do. They may have this
hmm
great school and absolutely love it and say, I can picture myself on this campus, and it doesn't happen. So,
It doesn't happen. Yeah. Yeah.
so
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I dealt with a student just like that this year who came to me. I didn't work with him originally when he was going through the process, but he came to me because he's thinking about transferring now.
mhm,
And that was exactly it. I think he had really kind of been told by his parents how special he was. And I'm sure he is special. He's a great, great guy, but he was not going to be competitive for some of the schools he
mhm,
was applying to originally. And I think it was just a huge shock and letdown for him. And same thing. I did exactly that, saying, look, you're fine. You're talented. You have these other options. You can always think about transferring. You can definitely think about graduate school. You're okay. And you weren't rejected. You weren't rejected, actually. They're not rejecting you. They don't think there's anything wrong with you. They
right,
just weren't able to offer you a place.
right.
And that's it. Yeah. Try to put it in those terms.
hmm
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's the hardest thing is because it
I
can be
know.
such a personal. So
Of course.
So with some of these students, though, they're looking at this, and one of the things we're going to talk about in class during that week is option, uh, options other than going straight to a four-year school. Especially
Hmm.
for international students, do you find that there's looking at the option for a gap year? Is that becoming more accepted, or what's your experience been so far with gap years, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I still think with international students, that's more of a last resort. That's
Hmm.
something that they might consider if they really don't get into any school that might be of interest to them, or that they feel is suitable, for them. So I don't see a groundswell of interest on the international side for that. And I think in particular for Chinese parents, not to stereotype Chinese culture because it's such a huge and diverse country, but traditionally, the Chinese education system has been very lockstep. So
Hmm.
the idea of falling out of that lockstep, I think, is kind of alien to a lot of Chinese parents and maybe even Chinese students. So a little more from Hong Kong, I would say, because Hong Kong's um, it's very international, and a lot of students go to international schools. They have friends maybe from the States already who are thinking about gap years. They know about all these many of the great opportunities that exist for service projects
Hmm.
or they're interested in work experience. So in Hong Kong, a place like Hong Kong, definitely, I think there's a little more awareness of it and openness to it. In China, no, not so much. I don't really see that. I see much more with Chinese parents. Let's get we just got to get him or her son or daughter settled and on track for college. So though I try to bring that up
Hmm.
and every now and then, not always too successfully, but I try. Give it a shot.
So, from your experience working with these small private schools, did you have students who had opted to do the gap year programs, and how did that affect them from that perspective? Was that
Absolutely, and it
beneficial?
often made them, yeah, very beneficial. It made them more competitive for admissions, sometimes for scholarships, and just, I mean, I think was hugely beneficial just in maturity, and equipping them to handle what was going to happen in college and giving them the tools to really take advantage of things academically, extracurricular wise, community wise. I think it made a big difference. So I'm a big believer in that. And just in my own life, I kind of I went right to college, right to graduate school. I didn't take a break, and it's fine. It worked out well. But I can see now in hindsight, I would have benefited so much from the maturity that would have come from an experience like that.
Mhm.
And so I'm a big believer in that. But yeah, definitely, I've never seen that be a bad experience. I've only see that be something that enhances the students' not just appreciation, but ability to take advantage of what they're doing in college. I would say,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely a movement that has grown over the last few years. Now we have gap year fairs, and
Mm-hmm.
people take a
Mm-hmm.
postgraduate year for athletics too. They'll do
Mm-hmm.
it for
Yes.
a sport.
Yes, yes. And I'm glad you brought that up. I have seen a little more willingness with international families to consider that maybe for athletics,
Hmm.
if it might help their son or daughter, be recruitable as an athlete. And so a little more awareness of that, the kind of, the traditional gap year that some kids have done at boarding schools, that kind of experience. I've definitely seen a little more willingness for that. But for some of the other great stuff like teaching in another country for a year, or again during service,
Hmm.
or some things that I've had American students do and love would be a harder sell for
Hmm.
international students generally, I think.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. That makes sense. That makes total
yeah,
sense. So,
yeah.
what other words of advice for counselors would you give? As coming from your background, you've had both the public school, the private school, and now you're working with the international students. What do you think as coming into this as a new counselor? What words of advice would you share that would be?
Two things. One, don't be afraid when you don't know something because every day you're going to get a question. I mean, I know I find this now. I get questions I don't know the answer to all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I don't want to be embarrassed about that. And maybe I don't always admit to the student that I absolutely don't know anything about what they're talking about. But I'll say, oh, that's interesting. I'm not so familiar with that program. I know who is. Let me look that up. Let me get some more information. I think you should not be afraid to do that. I don't think that makes you sound like you're not capable. And I remember my first admissions job at Stanford, before I went on the road, I thought I had to know absolutely everything. And then once I went on the road and went to high schools and met students, I realized, I didn't know anything about the psychology program. I didn't know anything about a particular study abroad program. Why would I? But what I would tell students is, what, I have some idea. I'll find out more. I'll get back to you. And I think that's important to always have that attitude, that it's okay if you don't know something, if you don't have a complete answer, tell a student you're gonna do more research for them, which is something for which they'll be grateful anyway. So that's a biggie to me. And I think also enthusiasm, always keeping that excitement going, trying to get your kids excited about college, finding things that are exciting to them and pushing that, moving in that direction. And so I think that's just such a big part of it. And I think that should be a big part of our jobs. Of course, we want to do everything right and helping them put together the best application and the best college list and, all of that. But I think part of it is that, we can do them a real service by making them feel good about the process and about where they stand in the process. I think that's a big part of it. That's counseling to me too, in a broader sense. So those would be the two most important things I think I've learned, honestly, over the years, I think.
Well, I think those are very valuable, and that's what's exciting. I see that, a lot of the counselors that either are just starting out or have years of experience can keep that spark of enthusiasm. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, is because this is a never ending, you can never just sit on your laurels and say, okay, I know it all. Things are changing.
Right.
So that fits in with your first point. Yes, it's okay to submit you don't know it all, because things do change.
Yeah.
College programs come and go, and and things. Opportunities. So.
And it's okay to say that's a new program, or I didn't. Honestly, I didn't know that the University of Wisconsin had that program. Let me find out more about it. Or if someone asks a question about admissions, you could say, well, in the last couple of years, University of Michigan, some of my students had this experience at University of Michigan, but that could change this year. I'm going to a conference in September, NACAC. I'll ask questions, you know what I mean, which I just did at NACAC. And in fact, I asked a lot of questions of Michigan in particular. That's why I happened to mention it. But, I'm along with other schools. But exactly, that's okay. And to the student or the parent, I think that shows that we're on our toes, that we're really working for them, So yeah, totally agree.
Yep.
Totally.
Very good. Well, Greg, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
And
my absolute pleasure.
And we will, if people have questions, what kind of email can they reach? Where can they reach you by email?
Sure. At gregorysmith.ph.d@gmail.com. I take advantage of that PhD. Why not? So it's why not? GREGORYSMITH.ph.d@gmail.com. And please send me a message. No worries.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm sure
my pleasure.
We'll follow up, and I know my students will really appreciate this. So
sounds good. And thank you for the opportunity, Cindy, too. And good luck to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.